Hi everybody, I hope you're doing well. I thought I'd jump on a quick video today and just speak a little bit about accepting anxiety. Something that I really struggle with. You ask any of the other moderators like Momin and Nick, they know how allergic I was to that feeling of anxiety. And obviously in the recovery journey for OCD, it's such a big part. And accepting anxiety and just coexisting with the feelings are so important as you move through the journey. So I think when it comes to anxiety, we have this innate tendency to want to be rid. We're frantically trying to change our internal state from anxious to unanxious, right? And we somehow think that that's going to be possible in the moment. It's understandable why we do that, because feeling chronic anxiety is very uncomfortable, it's very unpleasant, and naturally we just want it gone in that second, so we can feel good and enjoy life, right? But you find that it doesn't really get us anywhere. In my early stages of OCD, I was so desperate to be rid of anxiety. When I was stuck in my fear cycle, my whole day was just consumed with thinking about how I was going to be rid of the anxiety, how I was ever going to get to freedom, how I was ever just going to feel that baseline level of peace again. But I was so fused to how I was feeling. The anxiety internal thermometer in my head was just going on, just constantly looking at how I was feeling, and just keeping the cycle going. So when you've been stuck with chronic anxiety for a while and you realise it's not budging, in the end you sort of start to realise that this approach about trying to be rid of anxiety in the moment and trying to think about how to be rid of it, you sort of realise that that's not going to work. And I think gradually, as you move through the recovery process, you kind of come to the realisation that that is going to be your life for a while. You've tried everything to be rid of the anxiety, if you like, but you get to a point where you sort of humbly realise and accept that, hey, this is going to be me for a while. These moderators don't say it's at least a 2-year recovery process, just for the sake of it, right? So accepting that anxiety, though, is obviously one of the hardest things, because obviously you just want to feel better right then, right? However, as I've just said there, and especially in the book The Lasting Life by Paul David, you have to accept that sort of peaceful state you're after is not going to be your life, and for the time being your life is going to be coexisting with the anxiety, right? If you think about how long you've been anxious for, it could be years essentially. You're not going to go back to that sudden internal state of like peace and happiness and joy, right? But when you can sort of realize that the anxiety is going to be part of your life for a while, it's one of the best things you can do for recovery. It's a game changer, because you just sort of take your foot off the gas, right? And that pressure valve that just builds up, because you're really putting yourself under pressure to not be anxious. You're so fixated on being anxious. You're not giving yourself the chance for your nerves and your body to like heal and desensitize. So when you can just say, hey, look, I'm going to coexist with the anxiety for the time being, you're just releasing that pressure, right? And that's such an important part in accepting the anxiety, because the resistance just starts to go, right? So in acceptance, you're not just going to say, I accept anxiety, I accept it's there a few times when you feel anxious, right? That's actually a bit compulsive. Say you got triggered and you said, oh, I accept it, I accept it, I accept it. No, that's just absolutely not going to cut it. You're not going to be able to force acceptance in the moment. It's a gradual process. It's a gradual transition to coexisting, if you like. So in accepting the anxiety, what you want to be doing is that you want to be coexisting and dropping all the resistance. So in order to get to that place, yes, you're going to need to read the books on the reading list, probably more than once as well, maybe even 2 or 3 times. You're going to have to read each book, and obviously you need to break down your irrational beliefs. I'll go into that a bit later as well, but firstly, why shouldn't I be anxious? Why shouldn't I feel anxious? Being stuck forever with anxiety would be the worst thing. But yeah, I'll get onto that in a little bit. You just need to try it, and if you can, you need to get to that place where you have that internal willingness to experience a discomfort. You know, like, fuck it, if you're anxious, you're anxious. And part of that as well comes from like refusing to wallow in your suffering and choosing to live your life regardless, and taking your anxiety with you. You know, some days you're just gonna want to curl into a ball, close the curtains, maybe watch Netflix, and you know, just not go out and seize the day. But you know, even when you feel like absolute crap, you need to just push yourself. I remember times when I felt like absolute crap, and I would still go out. I'd still try and do the things I like to do. So, for example, I like to go watch my football team play. I'd force myself to do that. If I needed to do certain things, like when I was at university, and you know, go to my lectures or go shopping for food, I'd just push myself, you know, instead of wallowing in the suffering, because I knew that that was just, you know, letting the anxiety win at the end of the day. Yeah, and I think another part as well is feeling anxious about being anxious. So obviously Albert Ellis speaks a lot about this in The Myth of Self-Esteem, and um, how to stubbornly refuse to make yourself miserable, right? When you're feeling anxious about being anxious, right, you know, you're throwing petrol onto the fire. You're already anxious, right? So is there really much point in making that even worse than it needs to be? Well, not really. You know, if you're anxious, that's absolutely fine, but making it worse and saying, oh, I absolutely shouldn't be anxious, and just, you know, making the whole thing like twice as bad, it's just not really going to get you to where you want to be. And you just need to get to that point where you're just anxious, right? If you're anxious, you're anxious. You don't need to heap any sort of disappointment and frustration and, you know, sadness on top of that. It's just the internal state is that you're anxious, and that's it. You don't need to double it up. Obviously, in the early stages, you're going to be really fused to how you're feeling, because you're really, really scared of being anxious. But sort of as you know, deconstruct your beliefs about the anxiety, you stop being anxious about being anxious, right? And as you start doing that, you begin to make room for the anxiety, and then stop adding more suffering onto it. So yeah. I remember as well, just looking back to my journey, like after a rough day, I'd spend a lot of time like disputing my beliefs, and you know, I'd frantically be trying to get into my head that anxiety isn't 100% awful. I'd be writing it out several times in paper, reciting beliefs over and over in my head, you know, as I was walking and going about my day, even whilst at work. I'd be disputing for sometimes hours a day, just to try and be rid of it. But that's where I was going wrong. You know, I was trying to be rid of the anxiety. I wasn't really changing my perception on it. Also, as well, I'd compulsively watch videos in the moment when I felt really bad, just to try and be gone. Just for it to try and be gone straight away. You know, I'd say actually on your worst days, you're probably better off not disputing or working too hard in your recovery. If you're having a bit of a setback, of course, you're going to need to put some work in. But I say on your worst days, you don't really need to be disputing right there and then. So say you had an absolutely terrible day. Personally, if it was me, I wouldn't dispute that day, because and the OCD knows that you want to be rid in that moment, but disputing on that day when you feel like crap, it's not really going to do much. It's actually just showing your OCD that you're more scared. So on these especially hard days, I would just actually probably cut back on the disputing, but that's just me. Because it's that desperation, right? It's a desperation to be rid of it, a desperation to change your situation. Sometimes you need to take your foot off the gas, right? And yeah, just ride it out and just go right through the eye of the storm, which I think is a key part. But yeah, just adding on to what I just said there, you want to change your perception on the anxiety. You don't want to change your internal state. Nick made a really good point in one of the group chats the other day. If you're trying to force that change, or if you're trying to recover to try and change your internal state, you know, you're not accepting the worst case scenario, which is being stuck with anxiety or feeling anxious. So OCD knows that, and you're not going to recover. So you need to change your perception on the actual anxiety, and you need to try and stop catastrophizing it. So that includes changing the perception of it from awful to only a nuisance and frustrating, right? You know, you don't need to recover like you think you do. I know it's very, very tough, but you'll find that even when you're suffering from anxiety, right, it's still not 100% bad, because you can still do certain things. You're still able to walk and enjoy food, and potentially see your friends, and all these different things that you're actually still able to do even whilst being anxious. And you find that a human being can actually handle a lot of suffering and still be able to get on with their lives. But obviously in the early stages, that's very difficult to see, because you're very fused to the sensation and you think it is so bad. But you actually find that you don't need the anxiety gone like you think you do, right? Also, it's irrational to say that you absolutely need the anxiety gone, because you're saying like, it absolutely must not be there. I cannot absolutely stand it if it's there. My life is over. My life is ruined. But you find that you can actually do a lot of things even when you're anxious. Which is very key. And yeah, you just need to get to a point where you just genuinely don't care whether you feel anxious or not. These perception shifts will come along the way. Like, I remember I had a very very good perception shift when I was on holiday in Greece, and I was just sat in a bar and I just felt anxious, and I just had that sudden shift where it comes to me and it said, oh, do you know what? I actually really don't care if I feel anxious. If I feel anxious, I'm just gonna live my life anyway. I'm still gonna go out with my friends. I'm still gonna drink, have a good time. And you work for those perception shifts, right? You put the work in, and you dispute your beliefs, and you read the books to get those perception shifts that come completely out of nowhere. You don't know when they're going to come, but that sort of takes you up to that next level in the recovery journey. Think of it like a game. You just need to go from next level to next level to next level until you've actually completed the game, right? So even though it's not a game, it's a bit more difficult than that, but you know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, you need to get to a point where you're not bothered with any discomfort that comes in. That takes a lot of time. You just acknowledge it, you carry on with your day without fending it off. And once you get to this place, the anxiety really starts to back down, because as I said before, you're not adding fuel to that fire. But yeah, you just need to keep putting the work in, keep the faith. And as the moderators at OCD Recovery say, it's not rocket science, but it takes a lot more persistence than we imagine. So yeah, just finally then, I just wanted to share like an irrational belief in terms of accepting the anxiety and how you can potentially use it in your recovery. So an irrational belief, you might say, is I shouldn't feel anxious, right? That's a very strong irrational belief that we hold towards feeling anxiety and discomfort. But if it were me, how would I dispute that? Well, for example, I'd say, if I really shouldn't feel anxious, it would be impossible for me to feel anxious. However, I do feel anxious, so clearly that's not the case. There isn't any evidence to support the fact that my desires should be met. If there was, my desires would be met at all times, which isn't the reality of life. I prefer to not feel anxious, but because it's uncomfortable. However, I can still have some kind of life with anxiety being there. For instance, I could quite easily go and watch my favourite TV show or go out for a walk. Some people aren't even able to do that because they're stuck in a hospital bed on their last leg. So it could be worse. So that's just an example of how you could look at the anxiety and disputing why you shouldn't feel anxious. And obviously, when you break down why you shouldn't feel anxious, you lay the foundation for anxiety to be a part of your life, because you're not fending it off. And that coexistence will then eventually allow the anxiety to back down, because you're not resisting it and you're not so fused to it. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.